Capital to join me on stage for the next panel, Mridula Ramesh, founder of Sundaram Climate Institute, and Namrata Rana, National Head of ESG, KPMG in India. Huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for our next panel, all women, and I'm going to be moderating this session. Welcome. Welcome. Good to have you. All right. The only all-women panel that we have. Thank you so much. When it comes to climate crisis or any crisis, we always rely on women. And that's why we have all of these leading women to really help us understand what is the best way to tackle climate crisis, what's happening at the ground zero, and what do we really need to do. But when we talk about capital meets climate, what exactly is climate? Let's demystify that first. Mridula, let me start off with you first on that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I think when many people talk about climate, the first thing that we popularly go to is carbon. So we think of solar panels, we think of wind power, etc. But especially for India, which is one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world, I think we really need to think very differently. I've had the climate in the past decade echo my words. I think shaping supply chains and resculpting global supply chains has become an important question that everybody is asking, the China plus one question, etc. But when factories are relocated, nobody is going to relocate a factory in a place that floods, right? Nobody is going to relocate a factory in a flood that gets shut down because it doesn't have enough water to run. That's climate. Because we speak of carbon, but the climate itself speaks through water, right? What is one sector that we all depend on, which is completely exposed to the climate? Agriculture and the rural economy that runs off its back. So making farmers and farming and our food supply far more resilient is climate. Building, we were just talking that 80% of India is yet to be built. How do we make those buildings more resilient? How do we make it step lighter on the world? That's climate. If it's an FMCG brand choosing how to package its stuff better so that inventory is not lost, insurance person deciding how they should think about premium in ensuring either factory goods or not is a climate. Today, I'm a textile manufacturer and I'm thinking whether I should buy cotton for the full year or stop buying now.
Yeah.
And making that decision really involves understanding climate.
Absolutely. Swapna, let me come to you. When we understand climate, it's all okay. Now we're getting a lot of ideas as to where all can we really start working at, as what Mridula has indicated. But tell me, what is the investor's interest at this point in time? What are VCs, investors thinking at this point in time? What will excite them when it comes to green ventures?
Absolutely, and a delight to be here. I think investors will be where there is money to be made. That's what investors do, right? But if I have to think about, and Mridula peeled it very well, right? Climate doesn't mean one thing, but is a sum total of many, many areas. I think if I look at India, and we talked about how India needs to be still built, if we look at large 3 GDP contributors of the country today, which are supply chains, mobility, agriculture, energy, between them, we are talking about 70% of GDP, 90% of India's emissions. So really, if one could think about systematically tackling each of these sectors, there is a lot of money to be made, a lot of progress to be made, and a lot of technological innovations to be made. So with that, I think every VC, you can peel the labels, you can be a generalist investor, you can be super focused as a climate investor, you can be mobility investor, agriculture investor, or just another deep tech investor. All of us are looking at innovations which of course come from startups because they are faster, nimbler, which can systematically build technology which don't make, another shift, but step shift in how things are. So how this building is made, how can we reimagine this? How can we reimagine everything around us? Because this is our opportunity. I think the previous panel, which was talking about we have made good progress, I think the other significant part is we have not only made good progress for India, but for the rest of the world. To Mridula's point, I think climate doesn't really mean solar and wind because it's much more beyond, because if you think about rest of the world, they're all developed. If you look at the north, it's all well developed. They're thinking about mitigation. But as we're thinking about India, it's more adaptation, resilience, which means systematic thinking in process and product. So I think that's where our opportunity as investors also lie, that are there pockets where we can create innovation and large scale impact and return.
Absolutely. Scalability is also something that we will be talking about. But let me bring in Namrata here. And just now, Swapna did talk about, probably investors will be only interested where but the money will be made. Help us understand when it comes to ESG, how do you really assess? What are the metrics there to understand what's working? Because in a normal corporate world, it's the ROI, it's the bottom line that really functions. What happens when you really understand the work that you're doing in sustainability is actually impacting on ground zero? What are the metrics there?
So, last I heard, there are 1,437 discrete KPIs that need to be looked at when you look at ESG. But that was just last year. It's adding up. Last year there were about 500, last year there were 500 global compliances, now there are 1,200. So what does that really mean? It means that almost everything around us is either something that needs to be redesigned or it needs to be remade for the new world. We cannot have industrial processes that exist that are wasteful anymore. We need circular systems, we need new materials, we need new processes, we need new technology, which also means that the way that we measured success, which basically said that profit is all that matters, is not the only measure of success anymore. We need to account for larger scale impacts. We also need to account for things that mitigate risk. So therefore, when we start looking at what is the ROI, what are the metrics, what do you need to look at, there are certain thumb rules that will stay true always, which is that, are you doing something good? And that something good for the world without adverse impacts is something that needs to be accounted for in all investments now going forward.
Absolutely. Mridula, let me come to you. Again, we're talking about capital, and I wanted to understand, it's not just one form of capital that we are talking this day. There are so many kinds of capital that are flowing in. We all need to know what is the intersection point there. How do we understand when it comes to these different forms of capital then?
Yeah, so let me give a concrete example to answer that question. So you take startup A, right? This person is working on providing irrigation solutions to farmers across India. And probably one of the most climate impactful startups that I can think of. Now, they get a government grant. The government guy says, okay, fine, I'm giving you X crores. You will go work in Maharashtra in this district, right? Then he says, okay, he's also raising startup funds. So I come and say, no, I'll give you money, but I need you to look at how efficiently you're doing it. Then he goes and pitches for a philanthropic competition and he gets another 50 lakhs, but that 50 lakhs comes with the thing saying, you will take these 3 things along and you will show this result by 3 months. He's one founder. He's trying to work with 5 farmers and he's trying to make his money stretch. I feel really sorry. Okay, these are guys and men and women who are heroes, who are really going out there and doing it. I think the funders need to have a common agenda and expectation to the founder. I think there needs to be some collaboration. I know when Swapna and I talk, or Anjali and I talk, or I work with funders, I say, look, we have to talk amongst ourselves and give one input to the startup in terms of what are the common metrics to thing and prioritize those. Otherwise, you're just going to, kill the goose that lays the golden egg.
Absolutely. Swapna, do you want to add on to that when it comes to the financial institutions? How do they prioritize probably hand-holding, things, places? We're also looking at corporates here, startups, large-scale corporates. How do you handhold and probably guide them through this space?
Yeah, no, it's an important part of what we as Avaana do and as ecosystem players, all of us do. I think what Mridula said sort of stitches into it. I think founders, of course, find capital where they can and they work with various stakeholders. The important part is how do all these stakeholders be in sync, right? So I am a large corporate assume FMCG corporate, right? My big business is I need to replace packaging to meet my goals across businesses. Great, but I will not do it at the cost of profits, right? I will do it only when it makes business sense to me. Now there is this great startup who has figured out a packaging material which could replace traditional ways of packaging, of course, great for climate change, but it's 50% more expensive. Now, how do you bridge that gap, right? I think that is where funders like us come in, where we say, look, product is novel, there is an inherent demand, but at the price point that is there, the demand doesn't work. So you put in that patient capital and you actually work with them to get to a price point which works for corporates. But again, you can't build a product which no one wants. So again, you have to work, at least we have to work very closely with these corporates to understand whether there is a real demand for the product. I think that's where that bridge is very necessary between a startup or a corporate. I think similarly a bridge is necessary between, say, a startup and which way policy is being driven, right? Or regulatory is thinking which way. You could be building a lot of EVs, but today if we think about solar, EV, all of them actually became real when national missions came in place, national EV mission, national solar mission. As I think about, Mridula, to your point, circularity is becoming more real, right? BRSR guidelines are pushing people to think through what their emissions look like. So again, the challenge is when technologies are built in silos, someone else is making them work on their own projects, which cannot reach scale because the industry or the market does not need it. So we have to be that bridge to ensure that everyone is talking the same language.
Absolutely. Namrata, let me bring you in here. I wanted to talk about the risk aspect. How are you looking at, how companies are thinking of embedding climate risk in their investment strategies at this point in time? Also help us understand our current disclosure standards enough. Do we need more? How would you really look at that aspect?
So one of the most important things that have happened in the last couple of years is that central banks all across the world are basically saying that climate risk needs to be embedded when they start looking at giving a large industry or anybody else a loan. Now, the Reserve Bank of India last year came out with a draft guidelines that basically says that companies need to evaluate climate risk and opportunities. Now, that, to me, this entire statement says it all, which basically says that there is climate risk, but there are also emerging opportunities, and then banks need to account for that in their loan books. Now, this is something that across the world, different central banks are looking at. And if you evaluate the policy ecosystem in India, and if you look at what the government is doing, since the last year, there are many, many new things that have come out. So we had the BRSR, that's been there for a bit, but over and above that, the greenwashing guidelines became law in October last year, which is very important. Next, they talked about disclosure, advertising disclosures, and the fact what you can say and what you can't say and the kind of claims that you make. This year, the carbon credit trading scheme came out. The climate finance taxonomy has come out. So if you start looking at where things are going, they are only accelerating. And that essentially means that there is realization that there are massive climate risks ahead of us if we don't do something about it now. And those climate risks are going to impact finance, and finance moves the world around us. If it impacts finance, we need to start looking at it immediately. And large organizations, institutions have already started accounting for the climate risks that they entail. Not comprehensively, but it's a start. And I'm hoping that very soon the draft guidelines by the RBI will now become law.
Absolutely. Mridula, when we talk about SMEs, that's something that I want you to talk about. What do they think of climate?
So if I, just to be a little simplistic here, if you divide SMEs into people who are clueless, okay, that's a different organization. Then there are people who are clued in, but really don't know how to say, what do I do first, right? So let me, the good news about the clueless is climate is changing so rapidly that it will hit you on the head sooner or later. So you will become clued in. So when we come to what next, I think SMEs need two things. I think the role of industry organizations cannot be overstated. I think that is a huge hand-holding role that people play. That's number one. Number two is the role of big companies, the motherships, the buyers, the ecosystem formers. And I'm going to give an example here. I think Israel's water technologies would not be what it is today without Mekarot. Right? So Mekarot acted like the mothership. So a lot of SMEs, even startups, when they don't know what is the next step, how do I go to a buyer? Why should they give me time of day? If you have a bigger company making those introductions, like one of the things that I do with my brand name is I tell the startup, I will be your friendly customer and I'll help you, give you feedback. It'll be a little nice to you. And then you can use me as a reference to go forward. Right? These are some of the things that the bigger companies can do to handhold and show them the way.
Right. So now help us understand, something that we were touching base upon, scale. How do we make solutions scalable in today's day and age?
I think the good news is Indian startup ecosystem is more mature than it was, say, 20 years back, right? If we think about cycles of innovation, I think we knew how to do services well as a country, and we built large IT services companies. But over time, we have also been recognized as product nations for the world. And I think that's where we are seeing a lot of these made in India actually being relevant as much to India, but for the world. And that's where I think part of your question is answered, where scale kicks in. Most of these entrepreneurs are ambitious enough to say that, to your point, Mridula, I'm not solving for a small project in one district of Maharashtra. How do I think of, can I build it across India? Forget India, can I build it for Southeast Asia? Forget Southeast Asia, can I build it for Europe? Can I build it for US, right? That kind of ambition, which is, I don't want to be another $1 million revenue company. How do I become a $100 million revenue company? I think that's part one. I think the part two I'm also seeing is, it was okay earlier to be made in India, cheaper product and adoption will happen. I'm increasingly seeing founders build products which are at par competitive with global products at the same price point, right? So again, that is what is helping build scale, that the products are so superior in quality that you're not only scaling in India, but the rest of the world. I think the third piece is just general clueless and clued in part, right? I think people are generally not living under the rock. I think they all understand that lives and livelihood and businesses are at risk, which means if I don't adopt or adapt today, I could be news of the past tomorrow. So my business is great, but if it is not thinking of building 10 years hence, and which 10 years hence reality is development is happening, but climate is also changing. The supply chains are at risk. My agri farms are at risk. Example, I have a company called Iki. It is future of food production because it is making food produce like a manufacturing line. Tomato prices are rising, but common man can only afford at 10 rupees. Can I produce tomatoes at 10 rupees, right? That kind of thought process mindset for the world is what is helping them scale.
Yes, please.
If I may, I'm just going to add one point here. See, my institute works on waste and water, and we just looked at an enormous quantity of solid waste is burnt in India, right? With all the consequences that come with it. If we just stop burning waste and we managed it, like some of the municipalities in India do, not only will we create thousands of crores of innovative capital, we'll also create 1 to 2 million jobs. So look, climate's a huge opportunity, which I think, both my co-panelists have mentioned, and that's something to keep forward.
Why don't you weigh in on that? Data, what does that say? What is the role that transparency plays at this point in time also when it comes to ESG investing?
Transparency is actually needed as part of the circular economy. That's the biggest requirement. I mean, at this moment, you ask anybody in the ecosystem and they will tell you the number of digital payments that happen now. But if I ask a question that how much textile waste got generated, no one knows, right? How much waste got generated as part of, everyday, we were talking about platforms, right? So e-commerce has scaled, but what is the amount of waste that got generated because of that? We can do that, but we don't really do it. So the entire ecosystem, we have a tech stack for digital payments, for payments in India, but we need a tech stack for sustainability across the country, and that to me is the need of the hour that is actually really required. So what is it that we can do so that I know minute by minute nothing goes waste?
Fantastic. I think that's a great point to end with. Thank you so much, Namrata, Mridula, and Swapna. I think this discussion could have just gone on. Interesting facets that have been made by you. Huge round of applause for the panelists, ladies and gentlemen. And may I please request Siddharth Basu Chatterjee to please come up on stage, Associate Publisher of Business Today, to present a token of appreciation to all my guests.